It almost seems horrible to talk about this sort of thing around Christmas, but it is a news story, so we have to. And thank you for being prepared to join us this evening. What's in this latest batch of files then?
Yeah, and I think that timing is actually not insignificant in terms of Donald Trump's attempts to bury bad news, potentially, because people are distracted with Christmas holidays and so on. But we have we have nearly 30,000 pages of Epstein files in the latest batch. And as you mentioned, there is this email from someone called Balmoral, asking the Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell for, quote, inappropriate friends. And that the sign off of that message says see A, 3 kisses. But as with so many of these files, not much more context than that, apart from the email address as an alias, the Invisible Man. This batch has more Trump references than the previous one, and what's drawing attention is a 2020 email from a federal prosecutor which says Trump flew on Epstein's jet many more times than we thought. And it mentions 8 occasions in the 1990s. On one of those, there was a flight where it was just Trump and Epstein and a 20-year-old person who's not identified. And beyond that, various other references, nothing that is directly incriminating. Trump, of course, denies any wrongdoing. And it was also notable that when the Justice Department released these files, they put out a tweet, a message saying that these include sensational and untrue claims about President Trump, which is pretty extraordinary for a Justice Department to put out a statement like that.
There's a lot of sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink things in these files where we're almost invited to believe the worst of whoever it is that is being referred to in a particular email. There's something rather salacious about that I don't know about you, but I find quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the difficulties of these files, that we're getting a lot of photos and emails and other documents without much context or explanation. Another big story today that certainly the New York Post and others are running with is an alleged postcard written by Jeffrey Epstein to Larry Nassar, who was the US gymnastics team coach. And among the things that says, our president also loves young nubile girls like we do. And there's a separate document showing that the FBI was investigating the handwriting of that, whether it really was written by Jeffrey Epstein. It appears to be postmarked 3 days after Epstein died in prison. A lot of this material raises more questions than answers. A lot of it is salacious, full of innuendo. And yesterday, Trump himself was arguing that Bill Clinton and others appear in photographs without much context, and it's not necessarily always fair to them because they've not been accused of any wrongdoing.
Tessa Dunlop, the co-host of Where Politics Meets History podcast, and we were talking about yesterday, she was making parallels between Donald Trump and Richard Nixon in terms of sort of cover-ups. And I was sort of saying, well, the Nixon cover-up was totally different to this. But the more I've thought about it, I'm not sure it was particularly, in that if it emerges that it's true, that in some way, not necessarily Donald Trump himself, but people working on his behalf are attempting to cover up his involvement here. I mean, what are the possible consequences of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting debate. I think the Epstein files are probably the most Nixonian case in the Trump presidency. And that's unusual because actually, in almost every other issue, Trump is just very open and blatant about everything he does. So, for example, he will accept a $400 million jet from Qatar. It's the kind of thing that a past president would maybe have tried to conceal that, and a journalist would have spent a year digging away, and it would have gone on a front page and it would have been seen as a big scandal, whereas Trump is just very brazen and open, and somehow that seems to often reduce the scandalous impact. And that's why the Epstein files have been striking. He has behaved much more like a traditional politician with something to hide. He spent much of the year resisting their release until Congress finally forced his hand, and even now he seems evasive. And the first release of files on Friday, that seemed quite a concerted attempt to point the finger at Bill Clinton and Democrats instead of Trump. I think one other thing to bear in mind, though, is that he has quite a scandalous past. In the E. Jean Carroll case, he's already been found liable for sexual assault. He's had credible allegations against him from 24 other women in the past. Therefore, the bar is quite high for something dramatic and surprising that will make people really reel and accuse him all over again. We shall see if anything in the Epstein files reaches that threshold. I think if there was something incredibly damaging, then of course, like Nixon before him, he may be subject to impeachment proceedings, could even be forced to resign. I mean, that has always seemed highly unlikely with Trump, but this does come at a moment when some political tide is turning against him. You're seeing more dissent among Republicans. His approval rating is down to 36%. There are elections around the corner, and I think at least some Republicans looking to the future and saying, not even Donald Trump is going to be here forever. We now have to worry about our own political futures.
And in terms of the opinion polls, you say the personal approval rating is down to 36%. What analysis has there been as to how much the Epstein files have affected that, or is it down to other things?
I mean, the analysis I've seen does not suggest that the Epstein files are central to that by any means. Probably the best measure we have so far is last month's elections in New Jersey and Virginia and New York and elsewhere, where Democrats really swept the board. It was a terrible night for Trump and the Republicans, and I think almost universal agreement was the central issue there was the affordability crisis in America, just the very high cost of living, people struggling to make ends meet. They felt Trump had failed to deliver on his promise to bring prices down. And if you talk to voters, as I did and pollsters did, there were very few people saying, "Oh, it's all about the Epstein files, I'm going to vote on that basis." Nevertheless, I think it does feed into the climate of negativity swirling around Trump. It certainly doesn't help him. It's dangerous for him because he spent years feeding these conspiracy theories among his own base of support, and now at least some of those people may feel betrayed by Trump on this issue. So I would see it as one variable, one factor among many, but probably it's always hard for anything to compete with people's economic concerns.